It is Friday, and Wall Street is craving tacos tonight, or at least more of Trump always chickens out. Because while the president was doubling down on his July 9th trade deal deadline, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was teasing a Labor Day extension. Although Canada should not expect one. Canada, our closest friend, our closest ally, our neighbor up north. The president ended trade talks with our neighbors over a tax on U.S. tech companies and said that a new tariff on Canada would be announced within the next week. On that news, the stock market turned negative, but ultimately rebounded, closing at a record high. The nightcap is still here. Heidi, let's start with Canada. Which Trump are they supposed to believe here? Will he actually come up with a new tariff rate for them when he's basically kicked every other deadline down the road?
Yeah, I think that their new prime minister, Carney, he's got his number. He knows he's not reliable. He says, let's just try and deal with European nations. Let's deal across the world. Then not cut the United States out, because that would be extraordinarily difficult, but to just not rely on the United States. And I think, a billionaire recently said it, that we are a brand, the United States, the predictability of the United States, the friendship of the United States. And he basically erodes away that goodwill every day. But I don't think this is unexpected in Canada. I think they've seen this before, and I think they're going to do their own little workaround. And at the end of the day, you know and I know that if you take energy out, we have a positive trade relationship with Canada. And if you put services in, we're winning with Canada, but the president will never acknowledge that.
Do you think it's personal for President Trump and Canada? Because Mark Carney is so well liked by the business community, because he is Harvard educated. He's all the things that President Trump isn't. And when they met at the White House, Mark Carney was playing no games, didn't bend the knee. And when the president said, maybe we'll make Canada another state, he said, no, we absolutely will never do that. So do you think the president is trying to stick it to him? Heidi?
Well, I think absolutely he is. If you go back and you take, Stephanie, if you look at why Carney got elected, because the Liberals were basically going to be obliterated in this election. Carney got elected because Trump put Canadian sovereignty on the ballot, and Carney cannot politically risk, blinking as it relates to Donald Trump. And so Carney was created by Donald Trump, and now he's his worst nightmare, because he's got the chops, the economic chops, to actually do what he says he's going to do, which is divest in a big way away from the United States.
Art, the U.S. does a lot of business with Canada. You and I have talked about the impact the trade war has on farmers in your state. How does this development with Canada fit into this?
Well, I think we should point out that one of the biggest imports into Iowa and North Dakota is natural gas that's used to make fertilizer, anhydrous ammonia, nitrogen. And you need nitrogen to grow wheat or corn. And so corn costs are going to go up, which means beef costs are going to go up, and pork and chickens and eggs are going to go up if you can't get nitrogen, and if we can't get corn grown. We rely on Canada for a huge percentage of our potash, which is also a vital fertilizer component. And I'm not sure if it's Tuesday, if it's Wednesday, if it's Thursday, what the status of natural gas and potash are. At one time, we got an exemption for potash, but I'm not sure if that still exists as of today. And
it changes
but my real
every other
concern,
day.
Yeah, it changes every day. And so farmers, just like everybody else, would like some certainty. Markets are sliding sideways. Ag markets, commodity markets. Corn and beans were up today. Maybe they're down tomorrow based on this news that he's getting into another fight with Canada. I haven't checked in the last couple hours. But it's just a roller coaster ride. And we've already lost our soybean market with China to Brazil. That was in the last trade war that he started. And so everybody's just holding on to their jockstrap, wondering what's next.
John, do you think there's any chance the president just finds a way to walk away from all this, right? He's now announced a trade deal with China. But the trade deal he announced is basically an agreement of the framework that was discussed in Geneva back in May.
Tonight, President Trump says trade talks between the White House and Canada are over. The president abruptly pulling the plug on negotiations with the top buyer of U.S. goods. The president angry about Canada's new digital services tax. The president, as you see right there, calling it, quote, a direct and blatant attack on our country. He went on to write that the United States will let Canada know the tariff that they will be paying to do business with the United States of America within the next 7-day period. You can see right here all three major stock exchanges reacting to the president's post in real time. The Dow, the S&P, and the NASDAQ briefly dropped on the news. But look at that. Not only a sharp rebound, but the NASDAQ and the S&P closing at all-time highs. Even as this tariff fight drags on, Wall Street rolls on. My political sources are here. Karen Finney, the former communications director for the Democratic National Committee, and the Republican strategist, Michael Singleton. Michael, on the one hand, Canada imposes a tax. We know the president. You punch him, he punches back, what he perceives as a punch. However, the markets are rebounding. Yeah, the president still has issues out there with consumer confidence and what Americans think about, right track, wrong track. Want to do this again now?
Yeah, look, I think the market is trending in the right direction. I understand, and Kieran and I were talking about this, I understand why the president would be somewhat frustrated with the tax from the Canadians, but I would also imagine the Canadians probably want to protect their own growing technology sector. I would, however, want the Canadians to partner with us and buy chips from NVIDIA versus chips from Hawaii and the Chinese. And so these are some of the global things that I'm thinking about. So I'd probably go back to the conversation if I'm advising the president and say, let's figure out a way to, at a minimum, lower the tax so the U.S. companies greater benefit.
Right, but they didn't do it in talks, so that part's interesting. He did seem to be starting to have a decent relationship with the new prime minister, but let me take the contrarian argument. They just announced a new tax, retroactive to what, 2022, on some of our biggest companies, right? We're talking about Apple here, we're talking about Google here, we're talking about Amazon here, we're talking about Microsoft here. So forget the name Trump, forget that he's a Republican. Shouldn't any American president say, oh no, those are big players in my economy?
Of course they should. But the problem is, we're supposed to be having these 90 deals in 90 days. I think they've gotten about 2 of them. So the problem is the context we find ourselves in. Yes, you would want an American president fighting that fight. But as we've seen, the volatility in the market, the lack of consumer confidence. I mean, this anxiety that people are feeling is not going to go away. And if we hear the president, which I expect we will, early next week, come out swinging, what is that going to do to the markets? Because, again, he could have said, we're going to continue to talk. That's not his way. So, of course, he's making a big deal about it, and we'll see how they react.
When this became a big problem, turmoil in the markets last time, there was the 90-day pause. Now we're 12 days away from the end of the 90-day pause, and the president says.
Which countries, if any, are close to agreements with the administration? Well,
that's an interesting question. We've made a deal with China. We've made a deal with probably 4 or 5 different countries, with the UK. But, we have 200 countries. You could say 200 countries plus. We can't do that. So at a certain point over the next week and a half or so, or maybe before, we're going to send out a letter. We talked to many of the countries, and we're just going to tell them what they have to pay to do business in the United States. And it's going to go very quickly.
Maybe a foolish question, because this is the way he is. This is the way he acts about this, and the people around him say it works, right? You threaten, you bully, you threaten, you get back. But given what happened last time, with his own approval rating, with the turmoil in the markets and everything, don't you want to do this in private?
Yeah, look, I think the president is very sensitive to market ups and downs. Obviously, he cares a lot about that. I actually think, though, John, that this is perhaps a better approach. And I was stating this about a month ago, that I would have preferenced the president to go to multiple countries and say, hey, this is a baseline for the United States in terms of trade. Let's all just agree to this and figure it out versus piecemeal going country by country. It's 200 countries. That's a lot of countries to try to figure out. I actually support the effort of saying, hey, let's go to everybody and say, this is our baseline number. Let's agree and let's move on with business.
Go ahead.
They said they were going to get 90 deals done in 90 days. And we knew when they said it, that was not true, not likely to happen. And here we are. And he said they've gotten 4 or 5. And now he's saying, oh, well, really, it's 200. And that's a lot.
If you're covering campaigns like I do, or if you're planning.
Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is at the North Lawn. Legal contributor Jessica Levinson is standing by for analysis. And congressional correspondent Nicole Killian is following developments on Capitol Hill. But Nancy, let's start things off with you. The president posted on Truth Social this afternoon that he was terminating all talks with Canada Remember, we've got a 25% tariff on all goods not covered under that existing trade agreement with Canada and Mexico. So what caused this sudden shift?
Right. This was a big surprise, Kelly, because the U.S. and Canada had been engaged in very active trade talks over the past few weeks. Canada was certainly very eager to make a deal, and these are two close allies and major trading partners. But the president saying he's calling that all off. He's going to set the tariff rate on Canada, and that he'll let them know what it is in the next week. What set him off appears to be this digital services tax that was set to go into effect in Canada on Monday. This is a tax on revenue from digital companies, major technology firms, U.S. firms like Google and Amazon, a tax on the revenue that they get from things like advertising or harvesting user data. It is unclear what set him off now, because these taxes have been in the works for a year or so, but they were supposed to get collected starting on Monday. He wanted Canada to call them off. Apparently they didn't, and that's why he now says the talks are off. As you well know, Kelly, this is a threat that he sometimes makes and then rolls back when he gets a concession from the other country. So let's see if that's the case this time around.
Yeah, you're very right to note that especially with Canada, we've seen a lot of back and forth on this trade policy. I also want to ask you this, because you were in the Oval Office today and you asked the president about where things stand between the U.S. and Iran.
I want to make it clear, Donald is doing most of this to himself. The brilliant move Canada has done to trick him, in many ways, is let him talk. And I want to make it clear that it's actually less our government. It's less Carney and his government than the Canadian people that are putting Trump and the United States, his MAGA part of it at least, into an absolute tizzy. Because Carney has, in a sense, bent the knee to Trump, bent the knee on Iran, helped him whitewash his lies, bent the knee to Trump and Netanyahu on Israel, Zionist Palestine, bent the knee on the Golden Dome, bent the knee on the NATO 5% spending. Like, Carney's been doing a lot of knee bending and it hasn't been working. The appeasement strategy has not worked. But Canadians, regular Canadians, and let me know in the comments if you're one of them or if you know one of them, you have relatives or friends in Canada, or if you're a Canadian yourself, they've not been bending the knee. And in many cases, they've been canceling trips, canceling deals with companies. In some cases, Canadian companies have been making individual moves. Canadians on the shelves, you have a choice between buying a Canadian product and an American product, or a European product and an American product. They're buying the non-American version. And this is why American tourist boards and all that are freaking out. Now, it's important to realize that this is causing the overreaction from Trump. Because this is an issue that he could solve easily. The trust will take time to rebuild. It'll be long after he's gone. But he could solve the immediate tariff crisis and the business crisis by canceling all the tariffs and by stopping the insults and the annexation talk. It'll be over. He could be done by Monday. It could be done by Monday if he just pulled back. And the world sees that, and most Americans see it too. And one thing I will give credit to Carney on, I'm not a Carney supporter, I'm to the left of him, I'm an NDP guy, is that he's right to not back down on this sales tax thing. It's a digital sales tax. Why the companies were exempt for so long is asinine.